All right, good morning. I too want to say Happy Mother's Day to all of the moms in the room, and we're thankful for you. I know today is a day that has its particular joys, but also its particular pains. And as a church family, we're mindful of both and remembering both of those realities in our prayers today. We're going to be in Daniel chapter 3 today, one of the most famous stories in the Bible, the fiery furnace. Not exactly a Mother's Day sermon, I don't guess, but I hope that there's still some encouragement for you moms in this as well, especially as you think about the world that your kids are growing up in. The fire. We use fire often as a metaphor for hardship or difficulty. We'll talk about going through the fire. And nobody wants that. Nobody wants to go through the fire. But at some point it comes to all of us, whether it's disease or injury or disaster or heartbreak or injustice or even persecution. All kinds of ways fire comes to all of us. And we spend a good deal of time and energy thinking about how to prevent it, how to keep from going through a fire. We want to be safe, and that is good to a degree. I think there's a degree of saying we want to be cautious and recognize or don't get into unnecessary danger. But we need more than safety. We need to know what we would be willing to go through fire for, don't we? Isn't that more important than safety? Is knowing what you would go through fire for? We're going to think about that a little today. The first half of Daniel shows us a series of challenges that these young Jewish men faced in exile in Babylon, and we see at the same time God's hand at work in their life. So now we're going to look at the third challenge they faced. Daniel chapter 3, verse 1. King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold whose height was 60 cubits and its breadth 6 cubits. He set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then King Nebuchadnezzar sent together the satraps, the prefects, and the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces gathered for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So what's going on here? First, just want to recognize this is a display of royal greatness. You can't help but think about the dream that the king had. Remember that a couple of weeks ago? He had this dream, and there's this image, this statue in the dream, and he was the head of gold, right? There's other parts that are less stable, less valuable, but he's the head of gold. And so you almost can depict this picture of the king's ego coming out. It's all gold now. It's this great statue of gold. It is representative of his greatness and the greatness of his empire. We don't know exactly what the image was. Some say maybe it was Marduk, one of the gods, or maybe it was an image of Nebuchadnezzar himself, which would make sense after that dream. We don't know. But it is a display of the king's greatness. That is what kings do. At some point, probably in the last couple of weeks, we saw something about King Charles and his coronation, and they timed that just right for this sermon series. I couldn't help but notice this. One of the news articles said King Charles III was crowned Saturday at Westminster Abbey in a ceremony steeped in ancient ritual and brimming with bling. That's what kings do. The article called it a display of royal power. Charles was given an orb, a sword, and scepter, and had the solid gold, bejeweled St. Edward's crown placed atop his head as he sat upon a 700-year-old oak chair in front of world leaders, foreign royals, dignitaries, and a smattering of stars. You can't help but notice the similarities there. Lots of bling, lots of gold, all the important people in attendance. It's an impressive show. It's a display of might and wealth and extravagance. And it's also, we could say, many people made this comment even about the coronation, religion put to use for political purpose. Well, it's happening here too. Look at verse 4. And the herald proclaimed aloud, "You are commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, you are to fall down and worship the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace. Therefore, as soon as all the peoples heard the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, all the peoples, nations, and languages fell down and worshiped the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up." So the image of gold is a display of royal greatness. It's the greatness of the Babylonian Empire and King Nebuchadnezzar, and it is a loyalty test to solidify control over the empire. You notice that sweeping decree. Peoples, nations, languages, everybody, you move to the beat of the king's drum, or at least his horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, and bagpipe. The music plays and everybody bows, or else. And you do kind of chuckle as you read it. There is a humor to this story in the way that it's told and the repetition of that music and everybody bowing when they hear it. It is kind of funny. John Goldingay said the story is funny, but deadly serious, holding together two truths in this that you're supposed to see. There is humor to this. There is an absurdity to it. That a man would put on display his greatness and everybody should bow when the music plays. And then they do it. It's absurd. And it's also this tragic reality that it's one of those things that's, it's funny, but it's not. Right? I mean, bend the knee or you're going to go to the furnace and everybody does what this one man, I mean, it's absurd and then it's deadly serious at the same time. Can't help but think about our world. Sometimes we take these stories and we think other world, back then. Think right now for a moment. There is a forceful demand today to get with the secular program. A forceful demand today to get with the secular program. I want to be careful because there's a lot of things we could say right now, but I just want to bring out some of the ways that we're thinking about this. You'll hear in our society that today one of the going things is that you need to be affirming. You need to be affirming of anybody's identity, any way that they want to say, this is who I am, or this is how I want to live. We've got to be affirming of that. There's a forceful demand to do that. And if you'll think about it, what it is individual autonomy. It's making a god of the self. That's what our culture is doing. That's our image. It's a self-made image. We worship the self, and you had better bow when the music plays. You had better change. You notice there's even adopting of terminology. There's certain terms that you've got to use to absurd levels, to the point where we can't even talk about women or mothers. There's an absurd way that there's this expectation that we will bend to the secular program. And there are consequences for nonconformity. You notice that society is largely going with the program. And that's not because everybody sees that or values it. It is because there is a price to pay for going against the flow. If you stand against the cultural momentum right now, the forceful demands of society, if you take any kind of stand against that, your business will take a hit. You might get sued. You may get ridiculed or fired or threatened. There is a consequence for nonconformity. I read this week that those who ground their life in God are the outlaws of secular culture. So the story turns to the main characters, these Jewish youths in Babylon. Look at verse 8. Therefore, at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and maliciously accused the Jews. They declared to King Nebuchadnezzar, "O king, live forever." That is what you call kissing up. "You, O king, have made a decree that every man who hears the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into a burning fiery furnace. There are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, pay no attention to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you set up." So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, these are these three youths who are undergoing Babylonian enculturation. They're the ones facing this series of tests, and this is the most difficult test so far. There is high pressure to toe the line and great consequence if they don't. They've recently been appointed to influential position, and I think it heightens the pressure that is on them. Somebody in such a position, granted to them by the king, ought to bend when he says to bend. And the accusations tell us that they didn't. They took a stand. It goes against their Jewish conviction. It went against the first and second of the great 10 Commandments. They took a stand. Some, you may be wondering, you read through that and go, well, where's Daniel in the story? We've got these three. Where's Daniel? We don't know, okay? But he's going to have a corresponding test like this in chapter 6. So we know Daniel will take a stand too. It's also interesting that the accusers add layers to the offense. Not only do they're not just saying they don't bow, but they're saying they pay no attention to you, king, and they don't worship your gods. That's kind of what accusers do. Let's just pile it on. Let's find some other things to make these guys out to be really worse than they are. Look at verse 13. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in furious rage, commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought. So they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said to them, "Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I have set up? Now, if you are ready," hint, hint, "when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, to fall down and worship the image that I have made, well and good. But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be cast into the burning fiery furnace." So he's given them a second chance. Maybe I heard this wrong. Maybe you are going to do this. Let's try this again. "And who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands?" Speaking of funny, that is a humorous line. You set Psalm 2, verse 4 next to this. There's a line in Psalm 2 where the psalmist says, "He who sits in the heavens laughs." I think that would give the one who sits in the heavens a little bit of a chuckle. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter." In other words, this isn't even a question for us. "If this be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up." That's one of the all-time greatest statements of faith and courage. It's the structural center of this story. When you look at the way the story is written, it's got a structure to it, a design to it, and this is the centerpiece to it. It's the structural center. There is a God who is able, and he will do that if he chooses to do it. But even if he doesn't, we will not bend. We will not serve or worship anybody but the one true God. That is the center of the story. It's also bringing out the theme that runs through the whole book of Daniel, God's sovereignty and human responsibility. This whole chapter is full of God's power, God's in charge, God's the hero, but right in the center, the focal point of the story is this decisive and courageous confession of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. To say, we will not bend, no matter what the sovereign God does. Whether he does what we hope he will do or not, we will make a stand. So I want to stress for just a moment the concept of human responsibility. We have a sovereign God who we can trust. He has given to us responsibility. I like the way that John Lennox, what he says about this passage. God is a great deliverer, but he will not deliver us from having to make our own decisions. He's given us that responsibility. He's put us in a situation where we have to decide who will we follow, who will we serve, who or what will be our number one in life. What values will we order our life around? Will we have the courage to take a stand? Or will we go with the flow? We have to make that decision. That's a responsibility given to us. If you are looking for the main point today in the sermon, this is the main thing that I want to say to you. If you intend to follow Jesus, be prepared to take a stand. He doesn't do that for us. He will be with us. He is a great deliverer. He is the sovereign. But we have to decide. Who will we serve? Who's going to be our number one? When I stop and just think about my most costly failures in life, and I'm not going to detail them right now, but my most costly failures in life have been from taking a neutral position. It hasn't been just what you might see as obvious rebellion. It's just neutral. It's in private and in public. In private, when I don't stand up to my own desires, I don't make a stand. I give in to desire because who does it affect? Does it hurt anybody? Does it really matter? And then in public, I've got a lot of these. Not standing up for what was right. Very costly failure. And do you know why so many times I have not stood up for what was right? Because of the crowd, because everybody bends when the music plays. And nobody wants to stick out. Nobody wants to be the one that's different. I'll tell you though, those choices to not stand out, to not stick out, to not stand up for what was right, have been costly in my life. And I don't want to pile it on. What I want to pile on to you today is the abundant grace of Jesus. Because as many failures as I've had, it has been outdone by the grace of God. He is so gracious. We need to be confident today of the great grace of God. And remembering that an aspect of grace is growth. That he's teaching us to learn from what we've gone through and to live differently. So that next time I'm in that situation, I'll have more clarity and more courage to follow Jesus when it's hard, when it's costly, when it's not safe. I really appreciate some of Edwin Friedman's writing, and I like the way that this is kind of a paraphrase of him. He talks about our civilization. We are so safety conscious that it's dangerous. We are at risk of letting safety be our number one value. Safety is important. But if you value safety above everything else, if you value survival above everything else, you will compromise things of eternal consequence. Safety is not number one. Allegiance to Jesus is number one. And following him is not always safe. It is eternally safe, but it might not be in the moment safe. It might have consequences. In the short term, it will almost always cost you. Now, I want to just say one more thing about taking a stand, because we think about our culture and there's this loud, forceful demand that you will conform to the way things are. Taking a stand doesn't mean that you do it in anger. I want to hold together two things throughout this series: conviction and compassion. We've got to be people who have conviction, who take a stand, who are bold and courageous to do that, but never in unloving ways. Always with compassion and love for people. We just remember that being people of love doesn't mean that we cave on our convictions. We've got to be willing to take a stand. Now let's look at the consequences here. The outcome of the story. Chapter 3, verse 19. Then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with fury, and the expression of his face was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times more than it was usually heated. And he ordered some of the mighty men of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and to cast them into the burning, fiery furnace. We're not going to read all of this, but the mighty men, they follow through. And if you know the story, they lost their life in the process of throwing these 3 in. The furnace was so overheated that just drawing near to it was enough to kill them. Apparently, King Nebuchadnezzar was seated where he could look on. I'm sure far enough back where it doesn't affect him, but he's there where he can see it. And so we see what he observed in verse 24. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and rose up in haste. He declared to his counselors, "Did we not cast 3 men bound into the fire?" They answered and said to the king, "True, O king." He answered and said, "But I see 4 men, unbound, walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods." And as we read on, the king came near to the door, I'm sure as near as he dared. You don't want to get too close. And he calls out himself into the fire to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and he calls them to come out of the furnace. And they do. And all of the important people gathered around and saw that those 3 were not harmed, their clothes weren't burned, the hair on their head wasn't even singed. And then we get to the conclusion in verse 28. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him and set aside the king's command and yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any god except their own God. Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Therefore, I make a decree. Any people, nation, or language that speaks anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb, and their houses laid in ruins, for there is no other God who is able to rescue in this way." Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. Real quickly, I want to make 3 observations that I think have some encouragement that we draw out from this story to take home with us. The first is right there in that last verse, you see God's people thriving in exile. It runs throughout this whole book. Not only do Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego survive the furnace, not only are they delivered from the fiery furnace, but they are promoted to positions of even greater influence. The hostility heats up, and God raises them to heights you can't even imagine. We see God able to do with his people what he wants to do with them in a hostile environment. You've got the king in the beginning and the end of this story issuing decrees, but it's pretty clear by the end who the real sovereign is. Okay, King Nebuchadnezzar can issue decrees all day long, but the sovereign God will carry out his purposes, and that's incredibly encouraging. I think it encourages us to be less fearful and anxious about the world that we live in. Less anxious and fearful about the dangers that our children and grandchildren will face. It makes us more courageous and confident in the God who advances his kingdom in the most hostile of environment. God advances his kingdom in any environment. In exile, that's where our confidence is. Our confidence is not that society starts looking a certain way, but that God is always at work, no matter what things look like in the world we live in. Second thing, God's presence in the fire. This is what the king is astonished at. That fourth man, whose appearance is like a son of the gods. And there's all kinds of questions about this. What exactly is that? Who is that fourth man? Is it an angel? That's what the king said at the end. It's an angel. Is it a theophany? Is it a manifestation of God? Is this the pre-incarnate Christ? I don't know. But I know what the story is meant to tell us. It's meant to tell us that God was in the fire with him. This is a fulfillment of Isaiah 43. When you pass through the waters, the rivers, the flame, the fire, God says, I will be with you. This is what's being depicted. God with them in the fire. And I'll tell you who the fourth man is for us in our fire, in our trial. It's always Jesus. And that was his promise. Very last words of the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus says, I am with you always to the end of the age. Some of you are going through the fire. Some of you are going through stuff that is just unbelievably hard. And you've got to know, and this story is just depicting it. It's depicting what is eternally true for you. You are never without Jesus. He is always with you. And the fire looks different because he's with you. Third thing is God's power to save. I love that line. The king says, who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? Verse 15. And then at the end, he says, blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. No other God is able to rescue in this way. It is a story of deliverance, of rescue, of salvation, and that is the central message of the Bible, salvation. Not from a king in a furnace, not from momentary afflictions, but from sin, from the power of it, from the havoc that it's wreaked in our life, from Satan and his scheming, from death's grip, which feels so permanent, from the just punishment of hell. Rescue from all that we deserved or all that was unjust, bringing us to the eternal glory of God. Salvation. It's the central message of the Bible. It is the gospel that Jesus has come, that God has sent his Son to give his life on the cross, to be crucified for our sins, to bring us to God. Power to save. One of the things in our culture right now, anything goes. Any view goes. Any way you want to live goes. Unless you want to bring Jesus into it. Anything to do with Jesus is out. To talk of salvation is so antiquated in our world. Take a stand right there. Take a stand on the gospel. That's what Christians for 2,000 years have been doing. They've been taking a stand for this, God's power to save, a salvation that everybody needs. Romans 1:16, for I am not ashamed of the gospel, Paul says. For it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first and also to the Greek. Not ashamed of the gospel. I'll take a stand right there. It is the power of God for salvation for everyone. I want to invite you today, if you've not embraced and obeyed the gospel, you've not put your faith in Jesus, if you've not stood in a public way and made that bold, courageous confession of Jesus as the Savior, as the Lord, and been baptized into him, it'd be a great day to do it. We are not in a hurry. We would love to help you with that. Church family, if you've got something on your heart, you want to pray together, I invite you to come to the front while we stand and sing.